Rory, Sarah, thank you very much for organizing this beautiful meeting, but I'm not happy with the title of the meeting. You know that Richard Dole retired 3 times. Therefore, I would preferably to call this symposium dedicated to Richard Peto's first retirement, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you at the symposiums of Richard Peto's second and third retirement. Thank you. I have to start with what everybody has started. I know Richard for 40 years. He may correct me saying that we know each other for 41 years. In 1977, I spent 6 months as a fellow of International Agency for Research on Cancer in Richard Dole's Department of Regius Professor of Medicine. Since then, I have and had privilege to work with Richard on several scientific projects which had and have major impact on prevention of premature deaths in Russia. This is a famous quotation of Richard Dole's statement. You know everybody this statement, but I would like to draw your attention to it, especially because it is most relevant to Russia. Unfortunately, the majority of Russian men die before they reach old age. This is a slide which shows the trends. I'm sorry, this is not a slide. So I would like to start with alcohol, and I would like to show this slide, which shows changes, fluctuations, ups and downs in Russian mortality over the past 30 years. We have related them to certain political and social events, economic events, positive or negative, which we had and have in abundance in Russia recently. To explore causes of high mortality in Russia, we set up with Richard, that was Richard's initiative. Before starting this study, we discussed it nearly for several years at several occasions. And we set up with Richard a large epidemiological research project. It includes retrospective study and prospective studies and the analysis of 25,000 autopsies. So you see that retrospective case control mortality study included 500,000 deaths. Prospective cohort study included 210,000 healthy individuals, healthy men and women, and autopsy study included the analysis of causes of death of 25,000 deceased. On this right side of this slide, you see the results of retrospective cohort study. As you see, the drinking of more than 3 bottles of vodka per week was associated with increased risk of dying from 8 medical causes and practically all non-medical causes. Medical causes include cancers of upper digestive tract, liver cancer, tuberculosis, pneumonia, non-MI acute ischemic heart disease, liver disease, pancreatic disease, ill-specified diseases. Based on this analysis, we calculated alcohol attributable mortality, and in young men, alcohol caused nearly 60% of deaths. In older men, aged 55 to excessive hazardous drinking caused more than 22% of deaths. The cohort study completely showed similar results, and you see on this slide that the baseline alcohol consumption strongly predicted all-cause mortality among males. Estimated 20-year risk of dying from cancer was 16% in men who drank less than 1 bottle of vodka, more 15% in those men who drank from 1 to 3 bottles of vodka, and 35% in men who drank more than 3 bottles of vodka weekly. The association was also observed with amount of vodka drunk in men aged 55 to 74. As you see here, the association was not as strong, but those who drank, men who drank less than 1 bottle of vodka, the risk of dying from 20 years risk of death was 50%, and increased in those who drank from 1 to 3 bottles of vodka to 54%, and those men who drank more than 3 bottles of vodka, risk of death was 64%. So the results of these studies have been published in Lancet, and in other, and also in Lancet and some other journal, international, but also in Russian medical journals. These results, in fact, played a decisive role in setting up the alcohol control program in Russia. Russia has implemented a number of WHO recommended measures to control alcohol consumption, including raising excise duties, banning advertisement, restricting retail sales, setting minimum prices, banning night sales, fighting illegal production, and so on. And all these measures, led to decrease in alcohol sales, in alcohol consumption. Here you see the graphs showing the decrease in sales of alcohol. This curve shows the sales of all types of alcohol, and green curve shows decrease in strong drinks, in vodka. And these changes, these decreases in alcohol consumption resulted in decrease in mortality, very important decrease in mortality from all causes, from cardiovascular diseases, from external causes and external causes. The decrease in Russian mortality since 2005 has already saved some 3,500 lives in Russia. Now I would like to turn to tobacco, but I have to go now back to the 1985. At that time, I was working in the epidemiology unit of the International Agency for Research on Cancer. We met with Richard for several occasions in different parts of the world and talked on tobacco smoking in Russia and its effects on cancer and health in general. On this slide, you see the trends in lung cancer mortality in Russia, left men, right women. As you see, this is a point, 1985. And at that, there was a steep increase in mortality from lung cancer from 1965 until 1992. At this point, British, UK, and Russian curves cross. As you see, Russian mortality, lung cancer mortality goes up. British, UK cancer mortality goes down. In 1915, the mortality will come, there will be a 40% decrease in mortality between 1993 and 2015. You know, the situation, like the mortality trends, lung cancer mortality trends in women are a bit different. Russian women traditionally don't smoke much, and also they started smoking later than women in Western countries. Anyway, we see slight increase in mortality between 65 and 93, and then we see some decrease and then flattening. The curve is becoming flat. These are trends in cigarette sales in Russia. As you see, cigarette sales increased gradually. In 1984, it reached 300 billion pieces. Sales reached 300 billion pieces. But this was due to, and then we see the decline in sales of cigarettes in Russia. This decline in legal cigarette sales was caused by shortage in all consumers' goods, including cigarettes. However, legal cigarette shortage was compensated by illegal sales, illegal tobacco sales, and then after the from 1991, the tax regulation of alcohol and tobacco was completely ruined in Soviet Union, in Russia, and this flat curve is showing. Well, it shows the flattening trends in legal sales. Since 1998, the sales of cigarettes in Russia increased, and it reached some 100,000 billions of pieces. Richard noticed in 1985, he noticed that the Russian cigarettes may have a very high levels of tar and nicotine. And we get 40 brands of Russian cigarettes analyzed and discovered that in 45% of them, tar concentration was above 25 milligrams per cigarette. And in 65% of them, nicotine deliveries were more than 50 milligrams per cigarette. So, in 1985, In 1985, we had a meeting in Moscow, which was organized by International Agency for Research on Cancer. This was a very important meeting. That was, in fact, the first meeting which addressed problem of smoking tobacco in Soviet Union. Richard Dole was a honorary chair of the president of the meeting, and Richard and myself, we organized it, and we drafted the recommendations, which in one complementary approach, complementary recommendation addressed tar and nicotine levels in Russian cigarettes. By that time, Richard Dole and Richard Peto published a paper in which they noticed that there was a decline in lung cancer mortality in young men. I would like to draw your attention to this graph. Here we see trends in lung cancer mortality in Russia and three countries, former Russian Soviet republics, Kazakhstan, Latvia, and Ukraine. As you see, the turnover in lung cancer mortality have occurred in the same time, and that suggests that the cause of this turnover of the mortality curve was the same, the decrease in tar levels of cigarettes produced in Soviet Union and imported to Soviet Union. The decrease in mortality from lung cancer since 1993 only in Russia saved lives of some 250,000 men and women. A lot of things to do. I hope that we will be able to achieve that. And if you are seriously decided to retire, you are invited to join us in Moscow University and Moscow Cancer Research. If you are really serious about retirement, thank you.